There's a lake in the heart of Asia that holds 1/5 of all the world's liquid freshwater. It's more than all the 5 Great Lakes have together. Even if all the rivers on our planet suddenly changed their direction and set on a mission to drain this lake, it would take them a whole year to finish the job. I'm talking about the deepest lake in the world, Lake Baikal. If you decide to go all the way down to its deepest point, prepare for a journey of almost 5,400 feet. The descent takes several hours, but the rift floor of the lake is way deeper, between 5 to 7 miles beneath the surface. It means it could be even further down than the Challenger Deep, which is the deepest known place on Earth. The amount of water it has would be enough for everyone on Earth to have something to drink for up to 50 years. This mighty giant of a lake replenishes its water completely every 383 years. Baikal has a great delivery crew of over 300 rivers and streams, bringing their waters right in. And only one river flows out of Baikal, the Angara, which is headed straight for the Arctic Ocean. Baikal isn't only the deepest, but also the oldest existing freshwater lake in the world. It formed at least 25 million years ago. It all began when the Earth's crust decided to play Tetris and created the lake and the surrounding mountains. At some point, Baikal must have been just a humble riverbed, but then tremors and fractures shook the Earth, and the distance between the shores got bigger. Water levels rose thanks to the melting glaciers. Then, several lakes formed and later merged into one. Baikal is one of around 20 lakes in the world that are older than 1 million years. And since it wasn't disturbed by glacial periods, it's a perfect research ground for scientists. Its deep-drilled core sediments can tell a lot about the climate of our planet in different periods. Since Baikal is in a rift basin with 2,000 seismic tremors per year, the lake is deepening and still growing in size. Its shores drift apart at around the same rate as South America and Africa are moving away from each other, so it has all the potential to become an ocean. Another thing Baikal has in common with the oceans is that it has water rich in oxygen, even at its lowest depths. This is one of the reasons why the fauna of the lake is so incredibly rich. It's home to over 2,500 various animals and 1,000 plant varieties. Around half of them are unique and only exist in this area, like the endemic algae, the Baikal omul fish, and the Baikal oilfish. There are also some bears, elk, and lynx living on its shores. They must appreciate the fact that the temperatures around the lake are always higher than the rest of Siberia, thanks to its huge water mass. Most Baikal dwellers prefer to stick to the bottom of the lake, but there's one brave guy you'll meet if you decide to visit. Meet the Baikal seal, also known as Nerpa. It's the only true freshwater seal in the world. Nerpa's eyes are so cute it nearly landed the part of Puss in Boots in Shrek. Nerpa in Boots sounds good to me. These huge eyes are there to help them follow their favorite pelagic fish underwater. There are other seal kinds that can handle freshwater or use it to breathe, but these cuties spend their entire lives in it. But wait, how did seals, which are supposed to be oceanic creatures, end up in a lake miles and miles away from the sea? About 400,000 years ago, during the Pleistocene era, these adventurous creatures traveled up the river and drainage systems that connected Lake Baikal to the Arctic Ocean. The ringed seal that still lives in the Arctic is believed to be the Baikal seal's closest ancestor. Today, Baikal seals are confined to their freshwater home because of the changes in waterways. And they seem to be pretty happy with their home as they can choose from a huge variety of food to eat. The seals mostly hang out in the north and central areas of the lake, but move south in the winter. The lake gets covered with ice, which they use as a chill-out zone, just like their oceanic cousins use rocks or the beach. Since at least 1969, Lake Baikal has had some mysterious ice rings pop up randomly here and there. At some point, they got so big that the astronauts even spotted them from space. The rings usually appear in late April, but can be there in January or May. Scientists couldn't crack the code on how these rings form for a while. They had all sorts of theories, and the most popular involved methane gas bubbles from the lake's depths. But then, scientists noticed that some of the rings were in shallower waters, where gas emissions don't happen. So, an international team of scientists decided to solve the mystery. They traveled to Lake Baikal, drilled holes in the ice, and dropped sensors into the water. In 2016, when they started the research, they heard that 2 vans had gotten stuck in the mysterious ice rings. Once they had analyzed the data from the sensors, it turned out that the secret behind the rings was warm eddies flowing clockwise under its ice cover. The currents were less intense in the center of the eddies, so the ice above them was thicker at the edges. The waters of the lake are so clear that you can see some extremely deep parts up to over 130 feet down. This is thanks to the surrounding mountains that send off melting ice right in. Plankton that live in the lake also helps clean the floating debris. When this crystal clear water freezes, it forms an unusually thick and see-through layer of ice. The wind likes to play sculptor on Baikal and creates one-of-a-kind pieces of art here. It picks up water, which, of course, freezes into the most unusual designs. Frozen bubbles and icicles you've never seen before. The location and geography of the lakes and the cycles of melting and refreezing create the perfect conditions for this ice workshop. And you can even see rocks that seem to be floating. The bottom of the rock freezes to the surface of the ice. Then, the strong winds wear away the surroundings, leaving a perfect pedestal for the rock. If you think the floating rocks look eerie, how about Baikal's version of the Loch Ness Monster? The local Buryat people have a legend about the water dragon master that lives in the lake. A dragon is believed to be the most powerful creature living on Earth in Asian mythology. They believe there are 4 dragons living in the 4 seas, each responsible for one of the cardinal directions. Baikal is the North Sea in this story. The image of this dragon is supposedly etched in ancient petroglyphs on the cliffs of Baikal. There's also a hefty stone slab that looks like a monument dated back to somewhere between the 3rd and the 9th century BCE, depicting a mysterious water monster. Imagine the stories this stone could tell, echoing the whispers of a bygone era and leaving us to unravel the enigma of the Baikal cliffs. The legend says that a local warrior was chasing the dragon. He finally reached the largest Baikal island of Alkan. He was ready to face and defeat the dragon, but the beast turned into a beautiful girl, and they got married. That's one unusual twist to a classic defeat the dragon and take the girl story. So, local legends describe that dragon as a giant sturgeon with an almost gator-like snout and armored body. In reality, the mythical monster must be one of the many huge fish living in the lake. They can afford to grow to several feet in length thanks to the high levels of oxygen in the water. Beluga sturgeon can weigh several thousands of pounds, lives up to 50 or 60 years, and never stops growing. Lake Michigan is one of the largest and most mysterious freshwater lakes in the United States. And now, deep inside it, scientists have stumbled upon something unexplainable. Vast, round craters scattered all across the lake's floor. It all started in 2022. A team of researchers wanted to map the lake's bottom and look for some shipwrecks. At first, they were sure it's going to be just some typical rocky terrain or sandy patches. But what they saw on their sonar screens stopped them cold. Strange, circular shapes that looked almost too perfect to be natural. They were hiding about 500 feet beneath the surface, in places where the water turns dark and impenetrable. Those guys are huge, ranging from 300 to 600 feet wide. They also plunge nearly 40 feet deep. And there are dozens of them, neatly arranged like some footprints. But the team had no idea what these things were. Then, in August 2024, the mystery only deepened. Using a remotely operated vehicle, they got a closer look at these formations. There were about 40 of them. No one had ever seen anything quite like this before in the Great Lakes. What could have created those craters? Could they be ancient? Perhaps remnants of some geological event lost to time? If that's the case, it's weird how long these holes have likely been sitting there, undisturbed. Theories started popping up. One possibility was that they could be sinkholes or dolines. Those are basically holes that suddenly appear in the ground when the surface layer collapses. The rock beneath the surface, often made of limestone, gets slowly dissolved by water over time, creating voids underground. When the surface of those voids can no longer hold its own weight, it caves in, and this forms a hole. Think of it like when you poke a straw through the lid of a drink. Sinkholes can be small dips or huge, spanning up to 2,000 feet. They can happen gradually or all at once. Sometimes they can swallow entire cars or even buildings. And Lake Michigan sits on limestone bedrock. It erodes pretty easily when water flows through it. Sinkholes like these have already been found in Lake Huron, and they look kinda similar. But there are some plot holes, no pun intended, with this theory. For example, it's wild how they all would be so huge. It's also weird and pretty rare for sinkholes to occur in a lake bed. They also kind of resemble a straight pattern. They seem to extend generally southward, forming a loose line, which is pretty weird. If these are sinkholes, then they're definitely not playing the usual geological rules. Though it might be some new, unusual process at play beneath the lake's surface that we haven't discovered yet. There's another theory though. Glaciers. Glaciers are wild rivers of ice. They covered much of the Earth during the last ice age, and they're incredibly powerful. While they might move slowly, sometimes only a few inches per day, they have such immense weight that they can reshape entire landscapes over thousands of years. Glaciers can grind and scoop the land beneath them. They're basically like colossal bulldozers. Their weight, combined with the slow but steady movement, grounds down everything beneath them: rocks, soil, even bedrock. This can create deep gouges in the Earth's surface, called glacial troughs. During the last ice age, there were lots of glaciers all over the northern US, including the Great Lakes region. If they moved across what is now Lake Michigan, they could have carved out these deep holes. Glaciers often move in a pretty straight path. As they move, they cause terrain to erode, but the resulting erosion varies based on terrain. Sometimes there are places where the bedrock is softer or fractured, and these places are more easily carved and crushed by the glacier. That could explain why some holes could be bigger and deeper than others. Harder bedrock is less affected. But usually this leads to rounded, crescent-shaped depressions known as chatter marks. Those marks are more like grooves rather than circular, big craters like those in Lake Michigan. Once the glaciers melted, the Great Lakes themselves formed. If the craters were formed by them, they may have filled with water, becoming part of the Michigan Lake. Though this theory is more like a speculation, so we need more evidence. But there's another layer to this mystery. The craters are not just curious geological formations. They actually may hold valuable clues about early life on Earth. Parts of Lake Michigan, especially dark ones, are relatively low in oxygen. It's like a lighter version of deep ocean environments that often have very little of this element. For example, hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean, underwater openings in the Earth's crust with some hot, mineral-rich water that are often very low in oxygen. But some organisms love places like these. For example, opossum shrimp. Teeny tiny shrimp-like creatures that love cold, deep waters. They get their name because they have a pouch to carry their young until they're ready to be on their own, like an opossum. Or deep-water sculpin fish, small bottom-dwelling fish that also enjoys cold lakes. They're well adapted to living in dark waters and usually stay close to the lake bed. and weird organisms like invasive quagga mussels, which kinda look like shells. These are small freshwater mussels that have spread there to the Great Lakes. They attach themselves to hard surfaces and can cause problems for ecosystems by competing with native species for food and space. All these guys could be in Lake Michigan, and even more. There might be microbes or even bacteria that are specially adapted to these harsh conditions, just like it was in Lake Huron. There's only a handful of creatures that could survive deep within these craters, and studying them could give us insight into how life once flourished in Earth's ancient, oxygen-poor oceans. That's because it's in places similar to these where some of the earliest life forms thrived. Early Earth had an atmosphere with little oxygen, although it was much more hot, and ancient microbes adapted to this. The Great Lakes, especially Lake Michigan, have always had a bit of a ghostly reputation. Like even this mission was organized to study the shipwrecks. There were about 6,000 of them in the Great Lakes. Many of these wrecks are still sitting on the lake beds, preserved by the cold, fresh waters. And shipwrecks aren't the only strange things tied to the Great Lakes. Over the years, there have been stories of unexplained disappearances. Boats and even planes have vanished without a trace. The lakes, often calm on the surface, can suddenly turn dangerous with unpredictable storms and massive waves, leading to these mysterious events. Not even mentioning all the creepy stuff people noticed there over the centuries, such as ghostly lights above water or bizarre weather patterns like eerie, sudden fogs that seem to appear out of nowhere. In 2007, they even discovered some prehistoric structure that looks like Stonehenge there. Well, it was way smaller, but still. It lay about 40 feet below the surface in the heart of Grand Traverse Bay, and it's speculated to be about 9,000 years old, way older than Stonehenge. Looks like this is a print of those who lived in the area thousands of years ago. These massive stones are arranged in a careful, winding pattern stretching over a mile. They range in size from basketballs to compact cars. But one, in particular, stands out. A boulder 3.5 to 4 feet tall, 5 feet wide. It's etched with the image of a mastodon, a creature that roamed the Earth about 11,000 years ago before it went extinct. It probably sank there during the end of the last ice age we mentioned. This period had reshaped the region. This place is underwater now, but back in the day, it was still dry land. So the stones were probably created by people who lived there, though we're not sure why. Were they used as hunting blinds? Or was it some sort of an ancient calendar? Who knows? Only about 15% of the Great Lakes floors have been explored. Now, scientists are gearing up for a deeper dive into this mystery, both literally and figuratively. They want to analyze the lake beds surrounding the craters, hoping that maybe something in the environment around them might have caused them to appear. They have initiatives like Lakebed 2030. These missions should map the entire underwater landscape. This would help us learn tons of interesting stuff about Lake Michigan and our planet's past. Who knows what other secrets these dark waters hide?
Do you know what one of the most dangerous and scary lakes in the U.S. looks like? Let's check it out. This large lake is filled with blue water reflecting the sun's rays. Lush thickets of oaks and other trees surround this picturesque place. More than 150 small islands, which are the tops of hills, stick out from under the surface. People come here to swim and play frisbee, go boating, and sit quietly on the sand. Nothing dangerous, right? But if you dive underwater with scuba gear and start exploring the seabed, you'll see that it hides old fishing nets, broken sunken boats, debris of houses, and even graves. If you go to the local library and start researching the history of this place, you'll find out that many people were kicked out of the area against their will. You'll learn that there were terrible conflicts between locals here. You'll understand that the idyllic picture hides a terrible drama and hundreds of tragic fates. This is Lake Lanier, which is in North Georgia. It was named after writer Sidney Lanier, who created the poem Song of the Chattahoochee, dedicated to the river that feeds the lake. Despite the beautiful view, this isn't a natural body of water. Sidney Lanier is an artificial lake created in 1956 to fight floods caused by the river, to provide people with drinking water and hydroelectric power. The perfect place for creepy stories that often happen in small American towns. Before people created the lake, about 700 families inhabited this place. They made up a classic quiet village with farms, houses, churches, mills, and a cemetery. But when the state decided to create a lake here, the authorities forced people to leave their homes. Locals had lived here with their families for generations, and then they had to go away. Most of the buildings were moved, but the cemetery was left untouched. The graves are still there at the bottom, while people on the surface are swimming and having fun. 200 years before the lake appeared, the Cherokee tribe had lived in this place. In the 1830s, they also got kicked out of their territory. Then, in the first half of the 20th century, there was a very big conflict between locals. The reasons for the conflicts are quite scary, so we won't dwell on them. But it's important to note that more than 1,000 people got hurt by this conflict and were forced to leave their homes. So, we have a place where tragic episodes have happened 3 times, and where a lot of people have been injured throughout history. Of course, there's no scientific evidence that those events had any effect on the lake. But if we talk about spiritual, karmic plane, then see for yourself. Lake Lanier is considered one of the most dangerous lakes in history. 500 people have drowned or disappeared here since 1956, and almost 200 since 1994. About 11 million tourists visit the shores of the lake every year. About as many people visit the Louvre Museum in Paris. But don't think that accidents happen here because there are too many people there. A few dozen miles to the west, there's another popular lake, Altoona, and the same number of tourists come there every year. But there are almost 3 times fewer accidents there. For some reason, people drown at Lake Lanier, and motorboats often collide. There are no seasons with more or fewer accidents. So the cause of these tragedies may be hidden underwater. Many sunken boats, fishing nets, flooded villages, and graves lie at the bottom. Perhaps when someone dives here, they get tangled in nets, or stuck among debris or bump into rocks. Motorboats may not notice tourists passing by on air mattresses and crash into them. The water in the lake isn't very transparent, which makes it difficult to search for the missing. And then, there's also the legend that spirits inhabit this lake. Locals talk about phantoms who come out of the graves and try to pull the living under the water. Others tell stories about 27 ghosts of those who drowned in the lake over the years, but whose bodies haven't been found. But the scariest legend is probably the one about the Lady of the Lake. In 1958, 2 friends, Delamay Parker Young and Susie Roberts, got into their car. They drove to the gas station, refueled the car, didn't pay for the gas, and went to the lake. The evening started fun, but it turned into a terrible night. The girls drove off the bridge when they were crossing the lake and disappeared. For an entire year, no one knew what had happened to them, but people thought that the lake had taken them. One day, a local fisherman went to the lake to catch some fish and suddenly noticed a body in a blue dress floating near the bridge. It was poorly preserved, so the examination couldn't determine the identity of the person. But many locals were sure that the body belonged to Parker Young. Some people saw that day that she borrowed this dress from Roberts and put it on. But where was the other girl? And why was there no car? A few decades later, in 1990, authorities discovered an old Ford sedan at the bottom of the lake. They extracted the car and found the body of Susie Roberts inside. After this tragedy, locals started telling scary stories about how a transparent Parker Young in a blue dress grabs passers-by by their clothes and tries to drag them into the water. So, what do we have now? 3 terrible events have occurred at this lake over the last 200 years, affecting thousands of people. There's an old cemetery at the bottom of the lake, which the authorities decided not to move. 2 girls drowned there. At first glance, these events are not related to modern accidents. But honestly, we all feel and understand this connection inside. Places with such heavy energy and such a past may influence the present. Some skeptics will argue with this, but let's be honest, hardly anyone will buy a house when something terrible and tragic has happened. Today, Lake Lanier is more popular than ever. Millions of tourists, beautiful views, and picnics. Nothing suspicious, but you should still be careful. Just open the internet and read about the accidents happening there. Those missing people didn't expect their vacations to turn into a tragedy, so be very vigilant if you decide to come there. Now let's finish our video with something mysterious but more upbeat. How about the Vanishing Lake in Northern Ireland? You come there, swim, take cool pics, and decide to come back for a picnic with your friends. You come the next day with your homies, but hey, there's no lake. It's gone. Your friends are so angry. They come all their way there because of a silly prank. You feel like you're going crazy. Well, calm down. You're fine. There was a lake. In fact, it's still there. It just has a curious geological quirk. 3 streams fill this lake, but none of them can flow out. The lake fills up quickly, and then, when it reaches a certain point, it just flushes away, like the water in a toilet bowl. There are gaps at the bottom of the lake that are clogged with peat and debris. They act like bath plugs. But when there's too much water, these plugs fly out and the lake goes underground. So relax and come here another day when it's filling again. The road that leads to the lake is slightly raised off the ground so that people can walk along it. Previously, this road went underwater and reappeared. And don't be surprised if one night you see an old horse-drawn carriage on this road. It does look scary and creepy. Legend says that more than 100 years ago, a carriage with horses was crossing this lake when the water level was high. The carriage sank, and locals have been telling scary tales about the phantom ever since. So, some scientists drilled through the seafloor off the U.S. East Coast, only to find more water. But this time, it's the kind of water we can actually drink. And that's a big deal, because this new freshwater reservoir could supply a metropolis the size of New York City for the next 800 years. Now, the team is confused. They're trying to figure out how a giant freshwater system ended up under the ocean, and more importantly, how it stayed hidden from us for over 20,000 years. Okay, to be fair, scientists have suspected there's fresh water under the seafloor since the late 1960s. But only recently, researchers actually got on a boat to follow up on those reports. They named the mission Expedition 501, and they had one goal: drill to the bottom of the ocean and see what was really hiding down there. So those scientists drilled about 1,300 feet down off the coast of Massachusetts. And once they got that deep, they hit a thick layer of sediment that was basically soaked with fresh water. Now, that freshwater layer sat below the saltier sediment, and above it, there was a tight lid made of clay and silt, material that doesn't really let water pass through. This seal is strong enough to keep the 2 layers separated. So, up top, you got seawater, and down below, fresh water. The drilling process took about 3 months. In that time, they pulled up 13,200 gallons of water from 3 different spots beneath the seafloor, just off Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. They're still analyzing the results, but early reports suggest this reservoir might be much bigger than they previously thought. It could stretch from offshore New Jersey all the way north to Maine. Now, despite its size, it did a pretty good job hiding from us. Now, scientists are trying to figure out when and how this reservoir was formed. And back in 2003, one study suggested fresh water could get trapped under the ocean in at least 3 different ways. Theory number 1: tall mountains near the ocean can funnel rainwater straight down from higher elevations and into the seabed. Theory number 2: A hidden reservoir can form if sea levels stay very low for a long time and rainwater seeps into the ground. Then, when sea levels rise again over hundreds of thousands of years, that fresh water can get trapped in the sediment underneath. And theory number 3, which is connected to the one before, is that a freshwater reservoir can form under the ocean when ice sheets grow and sea levels drop. At the bottom of the ice sheet, the ice slides over solid rock, known as bedrock. As the ice scrapes and grinds against this rock, it creates heat, which melts some of the ice. That melted water collects at the base of the ice sheet. Then, because the ice is extremely heavy, it pushes the water down into the ground. Over time, the water gets trapped under layers of sediment. Well, more than 20 years later, scientists are finally close to an answer. The mountain theory is basically ruled out here because of the geography of New England. There are no large high mountain ranges right next to the coast. But the glacier theory could make sense. Their hypothesis is that the fresh water in this reservoir came from glaciers at some point during the last ice age, which lasted from about 2.6 million to 11,000 years ago. Still, it's not a final answer. The team is now studying the reservoir in much more detail. They're still analyzing things like microbes, rare earth elements, and the pore space in the sediment. All of that can help researchers estimate the reservoir's size more precisely. The age of the sediments can also narrow down when exactly it formed, and knowing its origin will help reveal how those systems have evolved over time. We just have to wait a little longer. But one thing is certain, there really is fresh water under the ocean. And when you think about that, it's hard not to wonder, wouldn't some salt get mixed in? And yeah, that can happen. So let's take a look at the map. Here's the reservoir. The farther you go from the coast, the saltier the water gets, and that doesn't matter much to us because it's not safe to drink anyway. But the closer you get to the coast, the less salt there is. The drill site closest to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard showed that out of every 1,000 parts of water, only 1 part is salt, so it's considered safe. You can drink it, cook with it, and take a bath in it. But why does all of this actually matter? Well, because fresh water is becoming a big problem around the world. I mean, the lack of it. A new United Nations report talks about a global water bankruptcy. They say we've hit a new and pretty worrying stage. More and more river basins and underground water sources, called aquifers, can't go back to their historical normal. Droughts and shortages are becoming more permanent, completely changing what life looks like in some places. For example, the Aral Sea. This was once the world's 3rd largest lake and looked like this back in the 1980s. And this is how it looks today. It's completely dried out. It's not just there. More than half of the world's large lakes have lost water since the early 1990s. And Central Europe has lost 39% of its glacier ice in little over 20 years. So even now, over 1 billion people around the world still don't have access to fresh water. And estimates say that in just 5 years, demand will be 40% higher than supply. That's why this finding is such a huge deal. It doesn't mean we're about to start pumping water from under the ocean tomorrow. But it does mean we might have backup options in the future, especially for big coastal cities. That's exactly the goal of Expedition 501. And it's not just in the U.S. This group is part of a much larger international science program called the International Ocean Discovery Program, or IODP. Their goal is basically to drill deep into the seafloor to understand how Earth works, its climate, its geology, and in this case, its hidden water systems. This expedition came after decades of unanswered questions. Like we mentioned earlier, researchers had hints of fresh water under the seafloor for decades. Those hints came from strange electromagnetic signals and seismic data. But back then, the technology just wasn't good enough to confirm it. So the idea stayed on paper for a long time. Everything changed when modern drilling came into play. Expedition 501 literally drills straight down through the seafloor and pulls up sediment samples. and this process normally takes days to months. Is it safe, though? Well, they say the ship that carries the drilling rig follows international rules to protect the environment. They're also taking every precaution to make sure no solid or liquid material is dumped into the sea during the work. Their new finding off the East Coast is only the beginning. For now, it's the largest one of its kind. But scientists believe there may be still many hidden reservoirs out there around the world. Similar expeditions are planned or already happening near other parts of the world. Soon, scientists might find new reservoirs off the coasts of Indonesia, Australia, and even South Africa. So, Expedition 501 is basically about mapping these hidden freshwater reservoirs and finding out how they form, how stable they are, and whether we can protect them. Because, yeah, they still have a huge technical problem ahead, which is making sure the fresh water doesn't mix with the salty water above and below it. And that really matters if we ever want to use this water in the future, or avoid contaminating aquifers that already exist near the coast. So this expedition is pushing scientists to find answers to a pretty uncomfortable question. If fresh water gets harder and harder to find, what options do we really have left?
You're walking along a hot desert under the scorching sun. You run out of supplies. There's no more water. You dream about rain, but there are no clouds in the sky. With each step, you lose more and more strength and fall. You notice a small pond nearby. Is it real water or just a mirage? You can't get to your feet, so you crawl there. The water is getting closer by the minute, but not because you're moving towards it. It's the water approaching you. In a few minutes, the pond area increases. Here, you're already in it. A small lake is formed, 60 feet deep, at the place where the piece of desert was. This real event happened in 2014 in the Tunisian desert. No one knows exactly on what day the lake appeared, since this part of the south of Tunisia is sparsely populated. At first, shepherds passing by saw the lake and didn't believe their eyes. In the next few hours, hundreds of locals came running to the place. They began to swim, jumping into the water from the surrounding rocks. But a few days later, something strange happened to the lake. In the beginning, it was a crystal clear turquoise blue color, but then it turned dark green. People didn't attach any importance to this and continued to swim. They shouldn't have done that. The scientists and geologists arrived and immediately announced that it wasn't safe to swim in the lake. Muddy green water means the lake is stagnating. It's not refreshed, it's not fed by underground springs. Now the lake is filled with algae and a lot of harmful bacteria that can cause serious diseases. They also found out that this region of Tunisia is filled with huge deposits of phosphate. This substance can disintegrate and leave radioactive traces. The lake can be carcinogenic, toxic, and hazardous for any living organism. But people didn't worry about this too much. They walk in the middle of the desert, while the sun heats the air to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of them are unlikely to refuse to jump into cool water, despite the warnings of scientists. Until now, no one knows exactly the reason for the appearance of the lake. Some scientists believe the lake was formed because of heavy rains. The lake is surrounded by rocks and is located inside a canyon. The water could just accumulate after each storm. Some geologists think an earthquake was the cause of the lake. A small seismic activity provoked the rupture of the Earth's rock above the water table, and through this hole, all the water splashed out. And if this theory is correct, then the lake can be pulled back underground through cracks. This is the same as when you pull the plug out of a drain hole in a filled bathtub. Any small earthquake is like pulling the plug out. Therefore, if you find yourself in these places, don't swim in this radioactive lake. We're going to the Caribbean Islands region. Among the clear blue sea, you can find a unique lake. It's located on one of the Paradisical Islands. You may not even notice the lake right away. The entire territory may seem like a huge concrete platform, but the main thing is not to step on its surface. Pitch Lake is a lake filled not with water, but with liquid asphalt. This is the largest asphalt deposit in the world, Steam is coming from all over the lake as it's hot. The depth of this lake is 250 feet. An entire passenger Boeing could fit there in an upright position. The lake is not fully studied, but scientists believe there's a deep fault in the Earth's crust under it. A huge amount of oil seeps through it. It passes through various chemical compounds and turns it into the asphalt. According to rough estimates, there are about 10 million tons of hot material inside this place. Theoretically, no life can exist in such conditions, but scientists have discovered a colony of microbes. Somehow, these creatures have learned to survive here. This also suggests that life outside of our planet may exist. The largest moon of Saturn, Titan, has many hydrocarbon lakes on the surface. And if the simplest forms of life appeared among a million tons of molten asphalt here on Earth, then nothing prevents them from appearing on Titan. We're going to Indonesia, to the island of Java. You need to climb a large volcano to see the next phenomenon. The volcano is overgrown with grass and trees, but it doesn't seem to be sleeping. Smoke is pouring out of its mouth. You climb to the top and see a clear lake instead of boiling magma. The blue sky is reflected in its bright turquoise surface. But don't try to jump there. This lake is filled with acid. The magma inside volcanoes comes from the deep bowels of the Earth's crust. The incandescent liquid consists of many molten metals and chemical compounds, and the lake is filled with particles of these metals. In addition, the volcano emits sulfur dioxide gases. When they combine with metals, they form a beautiful turquoise color. You'd better come back here at night. In some places, a lot of sulfur is concentrated. These accumulations come out of the lake and come into contact with the air. When this happens, everything around bursts into bright blue flame. It's safe to observe this from the side, but don't get too close. Nearby, on this island, there's another acid lake. It also releases sulfurous gases into the air, which are easily ignited when in contact with oxygen. And when this happens, the gases burst into a bright blue electric flame. It's difficult to see the flames during the day. At night, you can see these flashes from afar. Our next location is Australia. You start the drone high above the forest area. Among the green dense forests, you can see a bright pink spot. It's our lake. This time, the beautiful pink color may not stop you from swimming. You can relax here and take beautiful photos. The lake attracts thousands of tourists, but scientists have only recently been able to find out the reason for the unusual color. At the bottom of this salty lake in Melbourne, special algae grow and secrete a red pigment. In combination with sunlight, high temperatures, and a small amount of precipitation, it turns the lake pink. By the way, Australia is not the only place with such a phenomenon. There are lakes with a pink tinge of water all over the world. You can find them in Senegal, Bolivia, Kenya, and many other countries. The water of these places is also salty and contains the red pigment of unusual algae. We leave the hot beaches and fly to cold Canada. Here, we see a frozen Lake Abraham. We step on the ice and notice huge frozen bubbles inside. They resemble jellyfish, and there are thousands of them there. This is methane. It's a highly flammable substance. The grass, leaves, pieces of trees, and any organic substances that fall into the lake become food for a lot of bacteria that emit methane. Upon contact with frozen water, methane turns into tens of thousands of frozen balls. When the ice melts, the bubbles burst and sizzle. This phenomenon can also be observed on some shores of the Arctic Ocean. There, the size of the bubbles can reach several times more than balloons. It's a beautiful sight, but it's not safe, since methane ignites when it contacts with air. We're in the coldest place of our journey. It's Antarctica, near the driest desert on Earth. A dry place doesn't mean it has to be hot. It's an area with minimum precipitation. The desert isn't sand and cacti, but a place where almost no living life inhabits. Some areas of Antarctica meet these two criteria. However, in this icy desert, you can notice a tiny lake. Its depth is only a few inches. Technically, it's a pond, but the most amazing thing is that it stays in a liquid form. The temperature here drops to -58 degrees Fahrenheit. The pond should be frozen, but this doesn't happen. Don Juan Pond is one of the saltiest reservoirs on the planet. The amount of salt here doesn't allow the water to freeze. Scientists have been studying this lake for more than 60 years, but they still can't find out the exact reason for the appearance of water here.
Now, the Mariana Trench is the deepest and probably the most enigmatic place on Earth, whatever that means. Bizarre creatures, such as deep-sea anglerfish, frilled and goblin sharks, barrel-eyed fish, hatchet fish, live in a crescent-shaped trench in the western Pacific. Just 3 people have ever descended down the Challenger Deep in the southern end of the Mariana Trench. There, at a depth of almost 11,000 feet, vents are bubbling up carbon dioxide and liquid sulfur. Mud volcanoes erupt under the pressure 1,000 times greater than at the surface. And so, it's no place I want to go. So bye!
Get back in there.
Alright, since you clicked, yeah, you're about to visit places no less mysterious and creepy than the Mariana Trench. Your first stop is Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula to be precise. See those bottomless sinkholes filled with crystal clear water? It's fresh water that overlies salt water seeping from the sea. The sinkholes are called cenotes. The Mayans believe these natural wells were the gateways to the underworld. Thousands of cenotes, created by collapsed limestone bedrock, form one of the world's longest underwater cave systems. You can easily get lost in this tangled, mysterious network. Now it's time to visit the Caribbean. There, you'll get to a depth of almost 8,000 feet to see the Van Dam vent field. The hydrothermal vents fire out streams of muddy, scalding water with a temperature reaching 400 degrees Fahrenheit. That's almost enough to bake a pizza. These mounds are made of talc, a substance you can find in baby powder. The Van Dam vent field is an oasis for odd species. One of those is kind of a creepy shrimp without eyes. Instead, they're equipped with patches of light-sensitive cells on their backs. Now, you don't have to travel far away. The next enigma on your list is also in the Caribbean. Just off the coast of Belize, there is a giant sinkhole. It's also blue. Yep, that's the Great Blue Hole. The thing is about 1,000 feet across and more than 400 feet deep. Once, a long time ago, this hole was a cave until rising waters filled it, making it collapse in on itself. The deeper you descend into the Great Hole's crystalline waters, the darker it becomes. You see tons of stalactite-filled caves, but don't even try to enter them unless you want to get hopelessly lost. Once you reach a depth of 50 feet, you notice the water shimmer. That's the invisible line dividing the sinkhole's salty top from the freshwater abyss. Time to get out of there. Who knows what you might come across in the murky depths? Your next destination is off the Pacific Northwest coast. Almost 500 streams of methane bubbles were discovered there several years ago. Because of the bubbles, the vents got the name champagne seeps, which sounds better than the fart spas. Scientists are still puzzling over this phenomenon. Where does the methane come from? Underwater cows? Why is its temperature warmer than that of the surrounding ocean? And most importantly, what would happen if you managed to light a match somewhere near a large bubble? Methane is a highly flammable gas, and setting a methane bubble on fire, well, you get the picture. And now you're off to Iceland. The plan is to dive into Silfra, a fissure filled with pure glacier water. This 206-foot deep crack is the only underwater place on the planet where you can touch 2 continents at once. The deeper you go, the darker it becomes. The rocky landscape looks otherworldly. Divers who dare to visit this incredible place risk having their gear frozen, getting hypothermia, or not surviving whatsoever. After all, the water temperature in Silfra Fissure is about 35 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Your next destination is Scotland. Okay, cue the bagpipes. If you dive in the Gulf of Corryvreckan, a narrow strait between 2 islands, you'll see massive underwater rocks and deep holes. They create the 3rd largest permanent whirlpool on the planet, the Corryvreckan Maelstrom. The water moves through the strait at breakneck speed. It hits the underwater rocks, and the place looks like a pot with boiling water. The waves created in the process sometimes reach a height of 15 feet, and you can still hear the roaring whirlpool from 10 miles away. It's believed the Corryvreckan maelstrom has swallowed dozens of sailors over the centuries. They were caught unaware by the ferocity of this natural phenomenon and pulled underwater in the blink of an eye. Okay, enough bagpipes. Your adventures are getting more and more extreme. You're heading for Antarctica. There, in the Southern Ocean, you'll find the Ross Sea Ice Shelf. Say that 5 times real fast. Later, not now. It's roughly the size of Spain, with the ocean underneath containing as much water as the North Sea. Once, scientists drilled all the way down through this enormous chunk of ice. Imagine their astonishment when they found life in those extreme conditions. The researchers came across dozens of mysterious species not known before. The most unnerving were upside-down swimming fish and overturned sea anemones hanging in the frigid waters. Hopefully, bizarre places with a notorious reputation don't frighten you. Well, too bad, because you're about to visit the Bermuda Triangle. It's an area between Bermuda, Florida, and Puerto Rico where planes and ships seem to vanish in thin air. For the first time, this place attracted a lot of attention in 1945. That's when 5 U.S. Navy planes disappeared during training. Before radio contact was lost, the flight leader said, "We're entering white water. Nothing seems right." After that, the planes with 14 men flying them disappeared. Even scarier, a rescue plane with 13 people on board never came back as well. Some people believe the mythical city of Atlantis lies at the bottom of the triangle. They claim its inhabitants use extraterrestrial technologies to sink ships and crash airplanes. Others blame rare and unexplored natural phenomenon, for example, magnetic anomalies, or massive pockets of flammable methane gas. There we go again. Then, if a bolt of lightning ignited a giant methane bubble near a ship or a plane, this could probably make it sink without a trace, except the smell. But methane is found everywhere all over the world, and it never behaves this way. Some experts aren't sure there's a mystery to explain whatsoever. Lots of busy routes pass through this area. No wonder more ships and planes sink there than anywhere else. Now, prepare some warm clothes. You're heading for the north again. Your destination is Cape Desolation in Greenland. Nice place. In 2012, Canadian researchers were sampling the water in that area, and their equipment came back to the surface with pieces of coral attached to it. That's how a cold water coral reef was stumbled across. These unique pinkish corals can easily go without sunlight and live in strong currents 3,000 feet below the surface. Another unique spot you can't miss lies between Greenland and Siberia. The Gackle Ridge is the deepest and most remote portion of the global mid-ocean ridge system. In some places, it reaches the depth of more than 3 miles. It's only natural the darkest corners of this underwater world remain unexplored. Fascinating chemical reactions happening at the bottom of the ridge produce hot fluids rich in minerals. They spew, like freshmen at a rush party, from seafloor vents. And since these vents are isolated from the rest of the ocean, they're hot spots for bizarre creatures found nowhere else in the world. Your next stop is just off the coast of Cuba. Circular columns, paved floors, symmetrical stone structures. That's what the Cuban underwater city looks like. What happened there? Why was a large city abandoned at a depth of more than 2,000 feet? Lots of people believe those are the ruins of a long-forgotten civilization. But scientists have their doubts. They claim the lost city is nothing but a natural phenomenon that appeared about 5 million years ago. The disc and donut structures often appear around the areas of the seafloor where natural gases break free. Again with the gases. When you come to visit the Sargasso Sea in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, you won't find its shores. Instead, it's surrounded by powerful ocean currents. These are the same currents that turn the sea into a gigantic convention for dense brown seaweed. In the 19th century, a French ship was discovered in the Sargasso Sea. Its sails were set, but not a single crew member was on board. This mysterious disappearance made people believe the seaweed was carnivorous. The Sargasso Sea is indeed a weird place. It's always eerily calm and unnaturally warm. even though it's surrounded by the churning, freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Could one of these bizarre places become a home to the largest marine predator ever, the Megalodon? The giant shark's teeth, some larger than an adult man's hand, have been found pretty much all over the world. But since these creatures preferred warm, shallow waters, they lived along the coastlines of all continents except Antarctica. In other words, it'd be a waste of time to search for the giant predator in the depths of the Mariana Trench, in Greenland, or in Mexican cenotes. But then, could it choose the waters of the Caribbean to hide from the hustle and bustle of the modern world? Don't get your hopes up. There's been no proof the Megalodon does exist these days. It wasn't a shy, elusive animal, and still, no one has seen this shark lurking around recently. Not even near the fart spas.
You can find many picturesque lakes in Louisiana, but one of them stands out among all the others. This deep lake is calm and beautiful, but its origin is closely connected with the story of a large-scale disaster that changed the entire ecosystem. A catastrophe that people managed to miraculously survive. And this disaster happened because of a mistake of just one person. To discover the incredible history of Lake Peigneur, let's move back in time to more than 40 years ago. So, it's 1980, early morning of November the 21st. Several workers start their shift. They continue searching for oil. A drill on an oil rig in the middle of the small Lake Peigneur is an important part of this process. The depth of this lake is about 11 feet. If a grown-up person stands on its bottom and raises their hands, their fingers will reach the surface of the water. Everything goes without problems at first, but then the drill stops. It seems to have jammed at the bottom. Workers try to free the drill, but they can't do it. The engine gets overloaded, and people hear a few pops coming from below. At this moment, the entire rig begins to lean toward the water. The workers on the platform realize that something terrible is happening, so they run to the shore. A strong rumble comes next. The colossal $5 million drilling rig, with a height of a 15-story building, is slowly sinking into the water. But the lake's depth is no greater than a 1-story building. How is it possible? Imagine the water leaving your bathtub through the drain hole. The same thing is happening to the lake now. The drill has punched a small hole in the walls of a salt mine, whose tunnels run through the rock under the lake. And now, millions of gallons of water are pouring into these tunnels. The created pressure is 10 times as great as that in a fire hydrant stream. The miners find out about the disaster. While the water is flooding the tunnels, they're trying to evacuate from the mine. 50 people are making their way through the water and mud using mine carts. A slow elevator can only lift 8 people at a time. It takes 7 approaches to evacuate all the miners. Can you imagine how the people at the end of the line feel? The devastating flood is behind you, and several dozen people and 1 slow elevator are ahead. Fortunately, all the people manage to escape. The water displaces the air from the mine, compressing it. First, it breaks through all the tunnels, and then it comes out from the ground in the form of geysers. But the disaster doesn't end there. A large funnel forms in the middle of the lake. The hole is expanding, pulling more water inside. The land around the lake begins to crumble and fall into the mine. Along with the soil, the funnel pulls in 11 barges, a tugboat, the entire oil platform, and many trees. The whole beach around the lake disappears. There's so much water in the salt cave that the direction of the flow of the nearest river changes. Now, not only the lake, but also the water from the surrounding area is flooding the mine. The funnel is expanding. From the side, you can see the formation of a massive waterfall with a height of 164 feet. This is the height of a 16-story building. At this moment, it's the highest waterfall in Louisiana. Fortunately, the destruction doesn't last long. 2 days have passed. The mine is completely flooded. The funnel has disappeared. The water calms down. Several days ago, it was a shallow lake. Now it has a new bottom, located at a depth of 200 feet. This changes the ecosystem forever. New species of fish and animals appear there. The drilling company paid a fine of $45 million to compensate for the damage to all flooded enterprises. Of course, people investigated the cause of this disaster. It turned out that the engineer made a mistake in the maps. He used incorrect calculations to select the drilling coordinates and got to the salt mine. There is another lake with a huge funnel inside, and it's also artificial. But this time, people created it on purpose. Welcome to California, to Lake Berryessa. Previously, there was a small farming town of Monticello near the lake. In the last century, people built a dam here. But during the rainy season, the water level in the lake rose and poured over the dam's edges. Water flooded the land and washed away roads. You need to make the dam even higher to solve the problem, right? This is quite logical, but the town's engineers thought of something better. They dug a hole near the lake and covered its insides with concrete. It looks like a wide circular tunnel leading into the ground. During the rainy season, the level of the water rises high enough to reach the pit, and millions of gallons of water pour into it. It resembles a giant drain hole in the bathroom. All the water entering the hole travels through a horizontal tunnel and gets into the nearest bay. This is an effective and practical invention and an excellent attraction for many tourists. Skateboarders also like to hang out here. When the water level is low, they gather at the bay, near the place where the water flows out. The round tunnel is an excellent playground for skateboarding. We're moving to the desert of Yemen. There, we're also looking for a hole, but without a lake this time. This hole, the size of a basketball court, is in the middle of the desert. Scientists still don't know what's at the bottom of the hole or what formed it. But the locals are sure this pit is a portal to the underground world where evil spirits live. Even if you don't believe in all this, the giant hole in Yemen can still scare you. Sometimes, strange, frightening sounds come from the depth of this black abyss. And there's always an unpleasant smell of rotten eggs wafting out of there. The hole is so dark, it absorbs sunlight. You won't see anything, even if you point a flashlight inside. People have studied this place with the help of powerful optical lenses and drones, but they couldn't see anything except the frightening darkness. From a distance, this place looks like a blob of black paint in the middle of a golden sandy canvas. Even now, the giant hole in Yemen is one of the most poorly studied and mysterious places on Earth. But recently, a group of brave people got down to its bottom. They found stalactites, snakes, and even waterfalls there. Scientists are trying to figure out how the hole appeared and how old it is. Some say that the hole was caused by construction works when geologists were drilling the soil in search of minerals. The drilling process made the surface of the ground collapse. And now let's visit another famous hole hidden under a huge amount of water. It's the Mariana Trench. This is the deepest pit on Earth, located in the western Pacific Ocean near the Mariana Islands. It's so deep, it can fit 1.5 Everests. To dive to the bottom, you need special equipment that can withstand intense water pressure. It should be a sturdy bath escape with an ample supply of oxygen. It's expensive, but the trip is worth it. In the Mariana Trench, you can meet unique, strange creatures you will never see on the surface or in some other region of the ocean. Toxic crayfish and microorganisms feeding on a substance that looks like oil live here. You can meet fish with transparent bodies and see their organs and skeleton. Creepy, toothy monsters similar to anglerfish can swim by. These creatures seem fragile and harmless. But look at yourself. You're inside a bath escape made of alloys of several metals. Water pressure can turn an ordinary car into flatbread here. And these fish with transparent bodies swim as if they're just hanging out in the pool.
The tranquil-looking Lake Manaun in Cameroon is one real trickster. At first, it may seem calm and peaceful, but this lake is like a fiery volcano waiting to erupt at any moment. And it doesn't even have the decency to give any warning signs. Its last outburst was way back in 1984, which caused a bang that left everyone in awe. It's like the lake's got a soda can mechanism down there, or in technical terms, it experiences a limnic eruption. This rare phenomenon happens when gas from deep under the water suddenly erupts. Certain things have to happen prior for it to occur though. There are some things you can look out for if you feel worried. For starters, if the vegetation around a lake looks a bit flattened, it might have previously experienced a limnic eruption. That's because the water can pop up with a lot of pressure and overflow. The water being a bit warmer all of a sudden can also mean you need to head to safety. There's this lake in Kazakhstan that looks like a total disaster on the surface, with empty tree trunks sticking out of the water. Not cute. But if you're feeling daring and want to take a swim, you'll be transported to a whole new world. Its story goes back to the year 1911, when there was a landslide that filled the valley with rainwater, completely submerging a local forest. As mesmerizing as it might sound, it's no easy task to dive in. The water is freezing, and all the algae, plants, and submerged trees make it a risky obstacle course. Have you heard about this scorching lake on the sunny Caribbean island of Dominica? The water around the edges is at a sweltering 180 to 197 degrees Fahrenheit. No wonder no one has the guts to measure the middle. It's that hot. Sure, the heat may go down once in a while, but who knows when those waters will start boiling again? Plus, this place is full of nasty gases like carbon dioxide. Because of them, let's just say it doesn't exactly smell like roses. More like rotten eggs. So unless you want to end up looking like a boiled lobster, I suggest you stay away from these waters. If you're planning a trip to Tanzania, you might want to think twice before diving into Natron Lake. Sure, it's got a beautiful reddish hue, but that's thanks to some bacteria that call this lake home. And don't even get me started on the pH levels. They're so high they might even strip the color off your swimsuit. But hey, at least the flamingos like it there. Those acid-loving birds are living their best lives in a group with 2.5 million of their closest feathered friends. How come these birds manage to thrive there, you might wonder? Well, no predators means no stress, which equals easy breeding. They also love feasting on that fancy bacteria, which makes the water all pink. You may think that Belize's Great Blue Hole is just calling out to you with its stunning blue hues and close proximity to land. But hold your flippers, because there's a catch. Sure, it's about 900 feet across and 300 feet deep, but lurking beneath the surface is a confusing patterns of tunnels filled with coral and wildlife. It's like finding your way through a maze at a theme park, but with more fish. And as if that wasn't tricky enough, the deeper you go, the fewer creatures you'll encounter. Why, you ask? Well, it turns out that there's a sneaky layer of hydrogen sulfide that covers the entire width of the hole, depriving any living creature of oxygen. Plan on heading to the Devil's Kettle waterfall in Minnesota? This one won't necessarily be dangerous for you, but you might end up losing some of your stuff out there if you don't pay attention. That's because this waterfall experiences a phenomenon that's a real head-scratcher for geologists. One part of the waterfall flows normally, while the other part disappears into a big ol' hole. And get this, not even ping pong balls can make it out. Scientists decided to investigate, and they went all out, even using GPS trackers. Initially, they couldn't figure it out until they realized that the hole acts like a giant blender. That water is getting spun around so hard, it's basically obliterating everything in its path. They finally measured the water volume and saw that it was still there, so it was supposed to come back out somewhere. The most likely explanation is that the water is probably re-emerging in the stream located beneath the waterfall. You've surely heard of the Bermuda Triangle. I mean, that's old news. But let me tell you about the Pacific's very own watery trap called the Devil's Sea. It's like a game of hide and seek, but with ships. They disappear and we can never find them again. The Kayo Maru No. 5 was on a mission to investigate a volcanic island, but the trip ended up being just one way. Add a dash of detective work to the subject and you'll find out the whole story about the Devil's Sea is more myth and less fact, but it doesn't make it any less interesting. If you're still interested in some mysterious ship disappearance, then Lake Superior is the place you'll want to read about. Even the most skilled scuba divers can't find a single piece of all those lost vessels. The main character of this lake story was a ship called the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, the biggest one to sink in the Great Lakes. To this day, people aren't sure why it sank. So, you're planning a little swim in one of the Great Lakes, huh? Well, might want to steer clear of Lake Michigan, unless you're really into extreme water sports. This bad boy has a reputation for being the most dangerous of the bunch, thanks to some sneaky undercurrents that like to snatch unsuspecting swimmers. Make sure to watch out for those pesky piers and docks that only add to the lake's swimming difficulty. If you're feeling adventurous, you might want to skip the months of October or November. This is when the temperatures start to drop and the currents get extra wild. Tibet has its dangerous lake too, and at first glance, it's gorgeous. But don't get too excited. It's got a salt content so high that nothing can survive in it. Some villagers around there actually consider it to be tainted with some sort of substance. The cherry on top? Other locals believe there's a selfish creature living in the lake who's hogging up all the space for itself. No wonder its nickname is Darkness. No list of dangerous waters is complete without Lake Victoria, the big kahuna of African lakes and the third biggest in the whole wide world. But beware, not all its waters are safe for us humans. Some regions can be real troublemakers because this lake has its own personal climate. And what does that mean? Mostly that you can't trust the weather here one bit. You could be soaking up some sweet rays one second, and the next you're running from a torrential downpour. Unless you want to be caught swimming in a storm, steer clear of this moody lake. You might have already seen pictures of Lake Hillier. It's like a giant pool of grapefruit juice in Australia. Scientists have been scratching their heads over it for centuries because they still can't figure out with certainty why it's pink. But here's the kicker, it's not the only one. Yep, there's another pink lake out there called Lake Retba. Both of these lakes have super high salt content, which is apparently a magnet for some fancy microorganisms. These little guys produce beta-carotene, you know, the substance that's in carrots. And that's what gives these lakes their groovy colors. Interested in swimming in this lake? It's not technically dangerous because the water has such high amounts of salt in it. There are no scary sea creatures to worry about. But, on the other hand, you'll need to make sure you don't accidentally take a sip. Drinking highly salted water will make you dehydrate faster than a plant in the desert.
Boom! This word isn't nearly enough to illustrate the explosion, the most powerful one you've ever seen. And what's most important, it's a lake that's just blown up. Hey, all you wanted to do is light up some fireworks in this picturesque place. But you must have totally missed the danger strictly no fire warning sign along the way. And now, the wall of fuming water is quickly closing in on you. But first, let's rewind to the beginning of the whole thing. You're in Alberta, Canada, and have just arrived to Abraham Lake for a hike of your life. The lake is frozen, and the view is awesome. Those bubbles under the ice look like hundreds of frozen jellyfish. In reality, they're made of methane, a toxic and highly flammable gas produced by bacteria living on the bottom of the lake. That's why the sign is there. If you so much as light a match on this ice, it might set the whole thing on fire. Luckily, you've taken note of it on the way here and put away the fireworks you wanted to light up. Another place, another time. Another lake. This one's not frozen. In fact, it probably hasn't seen a winter since the last ice age. We're in Cameroon now, and the place is called Lake Nyos. It looks peaceful, but make no mistake, its orange-brown waters hide a deadly secret. The lake rests atop a highly volatile area, and the fissures in its bottom let out massive amounts of carbon dioxide. When the ground shifts, this gas spills out of the lake and flows miles around it. The concentrations are so high that one breath of it would make you faint, and you'd have zero chance of waking up. You get the picture. But the most sinister thing about it is that the CO2 doesn't have a smell or color, so you wouldn't even see it coming. Local authorities have set up a system of pipes that drains the gas from the lake, making it relatively safe for people and animals in the vicinity. And another toxic lake, Kivu, on the border of Congo and Rwanda, has even been made to provide energy for millions of people thanks to its gases. While we're in Africa, the Danakil Depression in Ethiopia is also worth a blood-curdling visit. Dubbed the hottest place on Earth, it sure lives up to its name. The ravine is peppered with extremely hot springs, toxic acid ponds, and active volcanoes. The landscape is surreal, to say the least, and is probably the only inhabited place on Earth where no life can exist. The Afar people live here all year round and gather salt around the springs for trade, while scientists couldn't find any evidence of microbial life in those. Humans are notorious for settling in places most would gladly avoid. Take Mount Tambora in Indonesia. Thousands of people have been living on and around its slopes for centuries until the fateful day in 1815. Tambora is a volcano, and that year it decided to erupt, resulting in a blast that obliterated everything on the island and was heard almost 1,000 miles away. It spewed out so much volcanic ash that it fell in sheets on the surrounding isles and caused a year without a summer in the whole northern hemisphere. It was the most powerful eruption in the last 10,000 years, and Mount Tambora became as much as 5,000 feet lower after it. But back to our time. There's an island you won't be allowed to visit, but I bet you wouldn't want to anyway. The Snake Island in Brazil is home to thousands of snakes, as its name implies. The moment you step on its soil, you're in grave danger of being bitten by a viper. The island is also the only place you can meet a golden lancehead viper, the encounter of a lifetime, literally. This place is so dangerous that Brazil has banned tourists and any other visitors from it unconditionally. Okay, gotta go. Now, get your warmest clothes on and don't forget a fur face mask. We're going to Omayak in Russia. It's a small town in the far north that's often called the coldest place on the planet where people still live. The only place with a lower average temperature is Antarctica, and that's saying something. In the winter, if you so much as forget to put on a sweater, and a fur coat, you'll get frozen to the bone in mere seconds. Temperatures here drop to the chilling minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Fresh fruit turns to chunks of ice in minutes and becomes so hard you could drive nails into wood with an apple here. Now, before you freeze in place, let's go somewhere no boat will take you. The Skeleton Coast in Namibia. No, really, you can only drive or fly in here because boats and ships won't go near the place. The waters are treacherous, sudden gales toss vessels around, and sharp rocks hiding underwater are all too happy to ram into their hulls. The coast itself stretches for hundreds of miles and is divided into southern and northern parts. Visitors on all-terrain vehicles are allowed freely into the southern part, but only about 800 people a year can get to the northern one, and only with guided tours. People are known to have been lost in this desert forever, and it's a daunting place to go. It got its name from numerous animal carcasses found here. Still, about 50,000 indigenous people managed to survive in this place, along with adapted animals, lizards, hyenas, and even elephants. Now, you'd expect a living destruction machine anywhere but the heart of Europe. Naples, one of the most famous cities in Italy, is built on top of an active supervolcano. In 2018, scientists noticed this monster of a mountain was building up magma in its depths. They say it isn't likely to erupt in the near future, but there's a smaller yet no less dangerous volcano just a few miles off, the infamous Vesuvius. You might remember it for the immolation of the Roman city of Pompeii about 2,000 years ago. You might, but I wasn't around then. This one has been active for a long while, and both citizens and guests of Naples put their lives at stake every single day they spend in town. But hey, while you're there, try the pizza. Northeast of France is also an unwelcoming place. A chain of areas has been dubbed Zone Rouge, or Red Zone, and declared off-limits since the 1920s. If, by some wild chance, you find yourself in one of these places, you'll only see wilted plants and scorched earth, so much in contrast with the lush landscapes of the rest of the country. The soil and air is so polluted here that people are prohibited to enter for fear of choking. And in any case, nothing can live in the red zone at the time. There's an inhabited island in Japan that was once closed for air travel for 8 years. Miyagi-jima is basically a volcano on whose slopes people live. It has been erupting roughly every 20 years, and the latest eruption was in 2000. The volcano doesn't normally spill lava, but instead it throws out enormous clouds of toxic sulfuric gases. Hey, don't forget your mask. Speaking of which, at the peak of its activity, residents of the island had to wear gas masks at all times, and even years after the eruption, they took those masks with them just in case. Hey, I can relate. Not far from where we've just been, in Kamchatka region of Russia, there's an incredibly beautiful valley in which you don't want to stay for too long. It's ominously called the Valley of Death, and it sits at the base of another active volcano. When the mountain lets out its fumes, spoiler, quite often, the toxic gases, heavier than air, go down its slopes and right into the valley. Small critters have no chance of survival breathing this stuff, and even larger animals and humans will have trouble getting out unscathed. Another deadly vacation destination is Saltstraumen Strait in Norway. It looks serene and beautiful, and you can almost feel it inviting you to take a dip and bathe in its waters. Don't do that though. Every 6 hours, the calm strait turns into a roaring mass dotted with huge and powerful whirlpools. It's all because of a tidal current between two fjords the strait is connecting. Here, on a high tide, the rush of water is too massive for the narrow stream, making it a deadly trap for both swimmers and boats. Now, over in Bolivia, there's a 45 miles long road that only the bravest dare to traverse. Yungas Road goes along the side of a mountain range and is a major attraction for cyclists craving for a thrill. A new passage has been built that bypasses the most dangerous parts of the route, but the original road was very narrow, with the abyss and no guardrails to speak of on one side and a steep slope on the other. Frequent landslides, fog, and rains made cycling here extremely dangerous and unpredictable, which, of course, never stopped adrenaline seekers from all over the world to come here for a bike ride like no other. Finally, if you like hot springs, you might also love a visit to Boiling Lake in Dominica. Located in a national park, it's a cavity filled with constantly boiling water from the rivers in the vicinity. It's kept hot by the extremely hot springs of toxic gas, and the fumes above the surface are also toxic. The lake attracts tourists, but getting too close to it might prove really dangerous. It's known to burst, flooding the surrounding area with clouds of gas. Hey now, get ready to dive into the Sea of Mysteries, also known as the Black Sea. It is the largest inland body of water in the world, bigger than the entire state of California. It has dozens of lost ships and some secret underwater tunnels. And some people believe it's an ancient quarry that was mined out in 6 stages. The Black Sea has distinct vertical layers that don't mix, with higher and lower salinity. The salty water comes from the Mediterranean, and fresh water comes from rivers. 10 of the largest rivers in Europe flow into the Black Sea. It receives more fresh water from the rivers and rainfall than it loses from evaporation. The extra water flows through the Bosphorus into the Marmara Sea. There are 2 flows going through the straits. The upper flow leaves the Black Sea and takes surface water out of it. The bottom flow carries salt water from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. That's why the upper layers of the Black Sea are less dense than its saltier lower layers. The oxygen that comes from the atmosphere and photosynthesis stays in the surface layers. Everything deeper than about 300 feet in the middle and up to 500 feet near the edge is not fit for life. Only certain bacteria can survive in these conditions. Although there's no air deep down in the Black Sea, the upper layer is home to around 750 species of phytoplankton. Eggs and larvae of fish and invertebrates chill in coastal regions. There are also 180 fish species in the Black Sea, and some of them are valuable, such as horse mackerel, spiny dogfish, and sprat. The water level in the Black Sea is always the same because there are no high or low tides, so the sea is always calm, quiet, and serene on the surface. But it has one surprise feature, an underwater river. It's a current of salty water flowing through the Bosphorus Strait and along the seabed. This amazing discovery was made by scientists from the University of Leeds and was announced in 2010. It's the first undersea river of its kind ever found. The river forms because salty water from the Mediterranean Sea spills through the Bosphorus Strait into the Black Sea, where the water is much less salty. The no-air zone of the sea is an ideal conservation chamber for what's hiding on its bottom. The Black Sea is like a treasure trove for shipwrecks, and we discovered it by accident. Some maritime archaeologists were studying sea levels to see how quickly the water levels rose after the last ice age, and they ran across over 40 previously unknown shipwrecks as a complete bonus. Researchers used 2 remotely operated vehicles to explore the seafloor and the wrecks. Thanks to it, we have a video and detailed 3D images of the ships that were stitched together from thousands of high-resolution photos. According to the New York Times, some of the standout discoveries among the 44 ships found include a medieval training vessel from the 13th or 14th century. Expedition members nicknamed another ship from the Ottoman Empire the Flower of the Black Sea for its beautiful petal carvings. The team also noticed unusual details on other ships, like coiled ropes, chisel marks, rudders, and other carvings. So far, they haven't announced any plans to excavate the shipwrecks, but the ships might be filled with historical treasures like books, parchments, and documents. It's worth a try to rescue them. The most extraordinary discovery in the Black Sea is what archaeologists believe to be the world's oldest intact shipwreck. It has been lying undisturbed for over 2,400 years. This ancient Greek vessel, 75 feet long, was found with its mast, rudders, and rowing benches all still in place, over a mile beneath the surface. Researchers believe the ship was a trading vessel, like those depicted on ancient Greek pottery, such as the Siren vase in the British Museum. This vase, or vase, dating from the same period, shows a vessel carrying Odysseus past the Sirens. The team took a small piece for carbon dating, and the results confirmed it as the oldest intact shipwreck known to humankind. The fact that it's so elaborate and well-preserved deserves a standing ovation for shipbuilders of the ancient world. Without microbes, worms, or other creatures to eat away the wrecks, it's no wonder the ships are in almost perfect condition. If the Titanic had sunk in these waters, we would have found it in a much better state now, not being eaten by nasty underwater microorganisms. Now, there's an interesting theory called the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, which suggests a huge flood happened around 7,500 years ago. 2 geologists in the 1990s suggested that at the end of the last ice age, when the Earth's climate was heating up, ice sheets were melting and sea levels were rising. The Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake. It was separated from the Mediterranean Sea by a natural dam at the Bosphorus Strait. As global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean overflowed into the Black Sea Basin. They suggest the sea level rose by 6 inches every day, flooded coastal settlements, and changed the environment for good. Samples from the Black Sea floor show a sudden shift from freshwater to marine species around that time, which means there was a rapid influx of salt water. Underwater surveys have also found what look like the old shorelines and human-made structures. So, people were living in areas now submerged by the Black Sea. Plus, the timing of this flood matches up with known patterns of human migration into Europe, Asia, and Africa. They also say this flood could be the terrible flood from the story of Noah's Ark. Critics of the deluge theory say the evidence isn't as straightforward as it seems. Some think the transition from freshwater to saltwater in the Black Sea was more gradual than one sudden flood. They're also debating if people left the settlements before they went underwater or as a result. An old chronicle that's been around for about a century says there were 2 underground tunnels starting in what is now Romania and Bulgaria and stretching all the way under the Black Sea to Turkey. Back in the day, peasants used these tunnels to move their flocks of sheep to the Ottoman Empire and countries on the Asia Minor Peninsula. Who built these tunnels and why they run under the sea is a complete mystery. At some point, the entrances to these tunnels were sealed off for national security and were under tight guard. The security forces knew all about these massive tunnels and kept them off limits. In the 1980s, a group of people working on the Danube-Black Sea Canal accidentally found another entrance to these mysterious tunnels. This one was in a cemetery in a town of Romania. Canal workers used it to regularly cross over into Bulgaria. One more cool thing about these 2 tunnels is that some people think they were built thousands of years ago. If you ever try to dig a tunnel under the sea, you'll know how tricky it is even now with all the tech we have. So if the tunnels are really that old, whoever built them was super advanced for their time. Now, there's an urban legend that says that the Black Sea has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle. Fishers describe some wild whirlpool that appears out of nowhere and drags entire flocks of birds, ships, and even small islands under the sea. And once, things got even wilder with a ship that vanished under weird conditions in 1944. It was during daylight, and some black fog with green flashing sparkles suddenly surrounded the vessel. No one has ever seen it since, and no one knows for sure if the story is true. But it sure adds a spooky touch to the mysteries of the Black Sea.
If you think about the most dangerous lake in the world, what comes to your mind? A lake full of monsters like Loch Ness? A lake with a portal to another dimension? A lake with acid or poisonous jellyfish? It's scary, but none of this is even close to the level of danger that Lake Kivu, located near the city of Goma in Central Africa, poses. This calm, beautiful lake can lead to one of the most devastating disasters on the planet. But to better understand what exactly is going on here, let's take a look at Mount Nyiragongo, which is located nearby. It's one of the most active volcanoes in Africa. On May 22, 2021, it began spitting out lava that flowed directly onto the crowded city of Goma. The eruption destroyed many homes. About 500,000 locals were forced to leave their homes. It was a major humanitarian disaster. But time passed, the crisis softened, and the volcano calmed down. It seemed that everything was okay, but then scientists began to worry about something else. This something else turned out to be much more dangerous than an erupting volcano, and it was something that was at the bottom of Lake Kivu. Some people call this lake a geological anomaly because of its composition. Underwater, the lake hides dozens of cubic miles of dissolved carbon dioxide, more than 10 cubic miles of methane soaked in toxic hydrogen sulfide. This is an incredibly dangerous and extremely explosive mixture. It's like a giant tank of kerosene the size of the Grand Canyon. At any moment, a spark can occur next to this barrel. In the case of Kivu, this spark may be seismic activity. The eruption of Mount Nyiragongo could also have triggered the outburst, but the lake stayed calm, and the disaster fortunately didn't happen. Let's make a small digression. You probably know what greenhouse gases are. These are water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and others. They stay in the atmosphere, retaining heat coming from the sun. This is something like a glass greenhouse that lets in sunlight, but doesn't allow plants, fruits, and vegetables to heat up. The sun sends a huge amount of heat to our planet. Such energy would burn Earth if it didn't have greenhouse gases. They let the heat pass, but only in a certain amount needed to maintain life. It's difficult to imagine how many greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere, and all these gases come up from below, from the surface of our planet. Now, let's go back to our lake. Scientists say that Kivu holds an amount of gas equal to approximately 5% of the annual greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And while these gases help us in the atmosphere, they are dangerous for humans. If they escape from the lake, they will fill the entire surrounding valley. Millions of people, animals, birds, almost all living creatures are at risk. Scientists studying this issue have stated that the Kivu Lake disaster can lead to one of the worst natural humanitarian crises in history. Now, don't panic. Let's find out how we can stop the disaster. Greenhouse gas emissions from the bottom of a lake are a rare geological phenomenon called a limnic eruption. What is it, and how does it differ from a regular volcanic eruption? In some tectonically active regions, volcanic gases seep upward from the depths of our planet. Sometimes they come across some water on their way. In our case, this water is Lake Kivu. This lake is deep, and the water at its bottom and at the surface doesn't mix with seasonal temperature changes. Well, you know how hot air always rises? It's the same with water. When the water is warm at the top and cold at the bottom in summer, it hardly moves. But with the onset of cold weather, the water becomes colder and denser, and winds help mix it up. But in the case of Lake Kivu, there's no such mixing, and the gas coming from the bowels of Earth accumulates at the cold bottom. Besides, the water above is pressing on it with its mass. As a result, gases coming from below accumulate there and cannot escape because of the water pressure. It's like they're capped with a cork. At some point, these gases can explode and fly upward like bubbles in soda. If you shake a closed soda can and then pop it open, the liquid will splash out in a fountain. Any seismic activity can affect Lake Kivu in a similar way. If something relieves that water pressure, the gases can escape too. A landslide, volcanic eruption, earthquake, drought, all of this can disrupt the structure of the lake, and then the fragile balance will break and trigger a catastrophe. So now you know how one of the rarest natural phenomena on Earth works. Fortunately, the lake is stable at the moment and there's no sign of trouble, but the danger remains. So what should we do? Should we accept the fact that toxic gases can fill everything around us at any moment? Fortunately, there's a solution to this problem. All these gases can be extracted. Some smooth pumping can neutralize the threat. No rush, just a slow, calm extraction. And it's already happening. Companies pump methane from the depths of the lake and burn it to generate electricity. It's a valuable natural resource. According to estimates, the lake contains $42 billion worth of methane. So the problem is already being solved. Is it? Many people disagree. On one hand, locals plan to increase electricity production several times, so there will be more work at methane extraction sites. On the other hand, human interference can destroy the lake's structure and trigger the release of all these gases at any moment. So what's the right thing to do? We need to look at other examples. This lake isn't unique, it's just one of the largest. There are also dangerous lakes in Cameroon and in Italy. In 1986, a limnic eruption occurred in Lake Nyos in Cameroon. A huge amount of carbon dioxide poisoned the air. It was a terrible disaster, after which people launched a project that could prevent similar events from happening again. In 2001, a team of French engineers lowered a pipe to the bottom of the lake and started pumping gas-filled water, which created a fountain of carbon dioxide. Such a miniature eruption was completely under control. In 2011, scientists added 2 more pipes, and by 2019, Lake Nyos was almost completely free of dissolved carbon dioxide. It seems that the Kivu issue is solved. Yes, it's much larger and contains much more natural gas. But what's the problem with installing numerous pipes there? In fact, everything is much more complicated. Kivu contains much more organic matter. Any lake is a bowl with trillions of microorganisms, and Lake Kivu is a huge feast for them. All the organic substances that the lake contains are eaten by small organisms and processed into methane. In addition, the volcano also produces methane, and this volcanic gas seeps into the lake through underwater rocks. Methane is much more difficult to dissolve in water than carbon dioxide, which means that its concentration accumulates over time. Then, what's the solution? So far, the best option is to carefully pump out methane and carbon dioxide. This means that geologists, physicists, chemists, and engineers must closely monitor the imbalance that occurs in the gas's pressure. You've extracted some methane and the pressure has decreased? Fix this moment and take all calculations into account in your further activity, slowly, carefully, and without any haste. It's important to extract all the gases from the lake. But what if an earthquake or volcanic eruption starts at that moment? It doesn't depend on us anymore. All we can do is monitor seismic sensors, and that's it. Scientists just discovered a lake in Antarctica that flips everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. They drilled through thick ice and found liquid water where everything should be frozen solid. And inside this water, there is life. I mean actual living organisms thriving in the dark, untouched for ages. The story starts with an expedition that added a new, super important spot to the Antarctica map. Between November 2019 and January 2020, researchers trekking across the frozen desolation reached an area called Enigma Lake. They thought they were walking over a huge slab of solid ice, but their gear showed something different. So they used a powerful drill to get through the ice, peered beneath layer after layer, and detected at least 40 feet of liquid water trapped under the surface. They came looking for a rock, but found a hidden world under ice in this Antarctica lake, where they would least expect it. The scientists were shocked and didn't stop at this discovery. They wanted to know where all this water came from, because in this part of Antarctica, the climate is ruthless. Extreme temperature, low precipitation, punishing winds, and solar evaporation aren't exactly perfect conditions for a lake. Any fresh water was supposed to have dried up long ago. So there had to be a source for refills for a subglacial lake in Antarctica like this one. The researchers looked at the chemical composition of the salts and dissolved materials in the water. They noticed some patterns that pointed to a source. It looked like the nearby glacier was feeding the lake via some underground pathway nobody expected to exist. So there it is, an amazing Antarctica discovery hidden beneath ice, fed not from rain or surface melting, but from an underground flow that circles the Earth in silence. And because of that, when the team drilled deeper, they didn't just find water, they found a secret ecosystem. Life, where they thought there couldn't be any. Now by life here, I don't mean the kind that waves at us, I mean tiny creatures. Tiny structures, microbial communities that evolved in isolation, shielded by the ice, and pretty restricted to their hidden home. They cover the lake bed in microbial mats, not just blobs of algae, but complex, carpet-like mats of microorganisms. Some mats look like thin, spiky coverings, others like thick, crumpled carpets, or even tree-like structures up to 15 inches tall. And these formations, looking straight out of a sci-fi movie about life on distant planets, aren't random specks of DNA floating in water. They are thriving, building structures, layering, changing over time. So the lake bed is kinda like a forest floor, only it's dark, cold, and covered by ice. If life can flourish under 45 feet of ice in near darkness, maybe our ideas of where it can exist need updating. And we don't know what happens when we disturb this hidden lake ecosystem. What if we inject humans, machinery, or even our breath into the mix? These microbes have lived isolated for who knows how many millennia, maybe even millions of years, without any exposure to the world above. If humans mess with them, these organisms could be at serious risk when they meet microbes they had never met before. The lake could get contaminated, and its ecosystem could change for good. As we step into this new territory, we must be extra cautious. After all, the entire Antarctica is like a book of secrets of evolution, adaptation, and survival that we must read carefully. This continent keeps surprising us. Animals that were never seen before turn up in its remote corners, from bizarre sea creatures to ice-loving insects you didn't know existed. For example, the ice-loving sea anemone scientists spotted hanging upside down from the underside of the Ross ice shelf. It looks like a delicate flower glued to the ceiling, waving its tentacles into water as cold as a bad breakup. Researchers steered a robot under the ice and found a brand new species. Then there's the celebrity newcomer with serious red carpet energy, the Antarctic strawberry feather star. This floating pom-pom can have up to 20 arms. It got its nickname because the body looks, you guessed it, strawberry-ish. And oh, I guess Antarctica is the last place where you'd expect to see a fish nursery, but it has the largest known one in the whole world. Researchers were there towing their cameras along the Weddell Sea seabed to map it when they spotted thousands, then millions of identical bowls in the sediment. The nests covered 93 square miles of seafloor, and there were a total of 60 million of them, one every 10 inches. All the nests belong to icefish. These creatures are white-blooded, meaning they don't have hemoglobin, the stuff that makes blood red, and somehow they still manage to survive in water cold enough to shatter your soul. Every nest had a parent fish sitting guard over about 1,700 eggs. Turns out, Weddell seals feast on icefish, so this massive breeding ground isn't just a nursery, it's also a buffet for the neighborhood predators. And speaking of buffets, the icefish themselves feed from a warm upwelling that pulls up nutrients and microscopic zooplankton. It's all pretty cool that the icefish colony has a hard edge, a literal line in the sand. The edge of that border matches perfectly with the outer rim of the warm upwelling, which looks like a carefully crafted evolutionary trick. Another Antarctica discovery that shocked scientists wasn't a cool-looking fish or a dinosaur bone, but something probably even more important for science: bubbles. Tiny ancient bubbles trapped inside what might be the oldest ice ever brought up to daylight, nearly 1.2 million years old. Before this discovery, researchers had recorded climate history going back 800,000 years, but they wanted more. They spent years searching for the perfect spot where ice could tell the story straight through. Some Antarctic regions hold ice even older, maybe 3 or 4 million years. But it's patchy, and they needed a continuous record. When they finally drilled into the right spot, they found crystal clear ice cores with bubbles that trapped the atmosphere of Earth as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago. When scientists analyze the air inside, they're not just studying gases. They can tell what our distant ancestors inhaled, what the planet exhaled, and how the rhythm of life and climate played out long before us. The period around 900,000 years ago, the same time sealed inside this ice, may have been one of humanity's closest calls. According to genetic studies, the human population shrank to about 1,300 individuals on the entire planet. Nobody knows what exactly led to this, but it could have been the climate. So these ancient bubbles might hold the clues we need to understand how our ancestors survived one of the toughest chapters in Earth's story. And maybe how we can survive the next. Because, the planet keeps repeating itself in new and uncomfortable ways, and Antarctica has lessons to teach us. One lesson we might learn the hard way has to do with what's under its ice. Scientists recently found that there's something brewing beneath Antarctica that's anything but chill. There might be volcanoes there, quietly waiting for their moment. Yeah, you heard it correctly. Volcanoes, the hot, fiery kind sitting under miles of ice. The team used computer simulations and found that when parts of the ice melt, the pressure holding those volcanoes down eases up. And boom! They could start melting even more ice from below. It's like a self-feeding loop of chaos. The ice melts, volcano wakes up, then more ice melts. Even if humans stopped affecting the climate conditions on the planet tomorrow, that chain reaction could keep going because it's not just about the air. It's about the fire hiding underneath. The scariest part is that this kind of melt could raise sea levels way more than we thought. And since Antarctica has over 70% of all the freshwater reserves on Earth, you can imagine the drama level it could lead to. So you see now that Antarctica map is like a real-life board game for humans, and we must be careful studying and playing it.
Well, this eerie Lake Huron discovery may be that it possibly contains the remnants of an entire civilization. Whoa, wait, sounds like Atlantis, right? Well, not exactly. But if there really had been an ancient underwater civilization here, it must have been a pretty advanced one. Around 10,000 years ago, two sharp glassy flakes broke off a stone tool and landed on the ground unnoticed. They stayed buried there for thousands of years, until 2013. Then scientists pulled up a small chunk of mud, about the size of a milk carton, from the bottom of Lake Huron, 100 feet underwater. Inside the mud, they found those same two flakes made of obsidian, a shiny black volcanic glass that forms when lava cools quickly. After careful testing, they realized these flakes came from Central Oregon, which is quite a distance, about 2,500 miles away. They found this prehistoric Great Lakes site on the Alpena Amberley Ridge, an underwater landform that once connected what's now Michigan and Ontario. Back then, it was dry land. Early humans used it to build traps for animals like caribou as the Ice Age faded and the Great Lakes began to form. Now, obsidian was the high-tech material of ancient times. It's super sharp and perfect for making tools. If you study the flakes carefully, it's obvious that humans made them. You can see where they struck them and the feathered edges that come from being carefully chipped. That means people were not only crafting tools here, but they also had access to obsidian that came from incredibly far away. It was likely possible through a huge trade network that spanned across the continent. For over 100 years, people have guessed that ancient societies might have existed beneath the Great Lakes, but no one had proof. That's why work on this submerged archaeological site is so important. A team of researchers has been trying to learn more about the 10,000-year-old ruins and the civilization that left them behind for over a decade now. Lake Huron's icy water acted like a time capsule that helped preserve things for thousands of years. So far, researchers have found not only unique stone tools, but also ancient trees with roots still intact and underwater peat bogs that preserved seeds and leaves. It was like an Ice Age version of Pompeii, a scene frozen in time. These discoveries are also helping scientists create new technologies and ways to do underwater archaeology. They've engaged sonars, underwater robots, and divers so far. Now, it's pretty cool that the tools they found on the Alpena Amberley Ridge were way smaller than other tools from the same era found nearby. That might mean a different group of people lived here, and they had their own unique way of life. Even the peat bogs they found, which are about 9,500 years old, hold secrets. They're full of pine needles, seeds, and leaves that could reveal what the environment was like back then. Usually, stuff like this breaks down quickly on land, but the cold freshwater preserved it. The Michigan team is working with scientists in Cambridge, England, to extract DNA from the remains. If it works, it could finally confirm what animals lived there, and maybe even more. There are still years of discovery on this prehistoric Great Lakes site ahead. Another famous submerged archaeological site is the lost city of Pavlo Petri. Archaeologists think it is the oldest sunken city in the world they've found and made official so far. Pavlo Petri is around 5,000 years old. That means it existed even before the legendary Greek heroes in Homer's stories. Scientists first spotted it way back in 1904, and then mostly forgot about it until 1967, when Nicholas Fleming rediscovered it. He described it as a Bronze Age city now lying under about 10 to 13 feet of water. A year later, he returned with a team of scientists to study the ruins. Over 6 weeks, using just hand tapes and a basic grid, they managed to map out the city. They found that it covered almost 1,000 feet by 500 feet and had at least 15 buildings, courtyards, 5 streets, 2 tombs, and around 37 small stone graves. They also found signs that the ruins continued onto the nearby island of Pavlo Petri itself. They dug up some amazing pottery, obsidian, and church blades, and even a tiny bronze figurine that may date all the way back to 2800 BCE. Most of the buildings, though, came from the period between 1650 and 1180 BCE. Then scientists left the site alone again until 2009, when a super team of researchers launched a new 5-year project to really dive deep into the history of Pavlo Petri. This time, they had digital mapping tools and better diving equipment, so they could explore and even excavate underwater. They found another 97,000 square feet of buildings, including a large hall and hidden streets. Plus, they dug up even more pottery that showed people had been living in the city from about 3000 BCE to 1100 BCE, and that the city once had a population of 500 to 2,000 people. No one knows for sure how the city ended up underwater, but many scientists think it was because of an earthquake, maybe around 1000 BCE, or even as late as 375 CE. Because it's the oldest underwater city ever found, some people even believe Pavlo Petri might have inspired the legend of Atlantis. Another contestant for the Atlantis title lies near Japan. Back in 1986, a local diver was exploring the waters near the Ryukyu Islands when he found a giant structure made of perfectly shaped steps and sharp edges. It was 82 feet underwater. Today, the Yonaguni Monument is one of the most mysterious underwater sites on the planet. The structure is nearly half a football field in size. It looks like a massive stone pyramid with layers of platforms and steps stacked one on top of another. No one really knows where it came from or who built it. Some experts think the monument might be more than 10,000 years old, which would make it older than the Egyptian pyramids. One theory is that it could be the last remains of a lost civilization called Mu, a mythical Pacific society kind of like Atlantis. Others believe an ancient culture that lived in Japan as early as 12,000 BCE might have built it. But many scientists and geologists are skeptical about this possible underwater ancient civilization, even though Yonaguni has narrow passageways, arched openings, and right angles that almost look like city blocks. They say that the site looks a lot like natural rock formations, like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, for example. The whole monument is still connected to a bigger chunk of bedrock, which means it wasn't built piece by piece. And the way the layers of rock are stacked probably has more to do with earthquakes and tectonic movement. It's located in the very active Pacific Ring of Fire. One marine geologist kept going back down there, and every time he found something new. He says he spotted tool marks in the rock, symbols carved into stone faces, and even rock formations shaped like animals. He believes these carvings point to a culture that came from mainland Asia. He said he had identified 10 different structures off Yonaguni, including a ruined castle, a triumphal arch, 5 temples, and even a huge museum. These buildings seem to be connected by roads and channels, and some parts are surrounded by what could be giant stone walls. The explorer believes the city is at least 5,000 years old, based on stalactites found in underwater caves nearby, which would have only formed after the caves flooded. His supporters say they have never seen an earthquake create shapes like this, above or below water. But skeptics blame it all on erosion and insist that whirling underwater currents and sea creatures left holes in the rock. Now, if you want to form your own opinion about it, the spot is open for visitors, and it's definitely a super fun diving experience.